Hey, I'm CaptainPira, and this month I'll be making Evelyn from Cyberpunk2077. The dress, boot covers, and the little thingies. Let's get started. Over the winter holidays, I usually like to make something sparkly because that's when all the holiday fabrics are in stock. And this year I didn't get to peruse any because I haven't been anywhere. So I did my first online order for fabric. I believe shipping to Canada was about $20 for 6 yards of fabric. I really liked this sparkly dress and thought if I made it really fast I could wear it for New Year's Eve, but the fabric didn't come until New Year's. So I ordered this December 8th and it still managed to come by New Year's Eve, so I'm not faulting them for this. They double wrapped it so it would travel better. Let's open it up. This isn't for this project. This was for Sakaizo. I probably bought way more than I need, but what I placed the order for. And these, I think the squares are even bigger than I was anticipating, which is great. For this project, I won't be using them straight way. I'm going to be using them diagonal, which means I had no idea how much I was going to need, and I bought 4 yards just in case. There was only about 40 inches of actual usable sequin in between because the mesh edges are pretty big. But this actually feels like a nicer fabric than I was anticipating. At least like the sequin pieces are softer than the one I've worked with before, so I'm pretty optimistic. They're lovely. I thought if I don't make this, I'd finally have a professional background for Zoom calls.
To start, I trace off my front bodice slippers indicating where my underbust hits and separating it. I also draft the deep V-neck. And a paper test fit. I'll also be cutting a rectangle out of the center front down to the waist to deepen the plunge neck. I copy the back as well, dividing the top at the same height as the front panel. The current armholes are pretty conservative, so I open them more at the shoulder, being sure to reduce by the same amount on the front and the back. While I don't have a back ref, I'm choosing to open it to match the front aesthetic, and for comfort. I can also use a shorter zipper. I also try to remove the darts, but as this material has no stretch, it doesn't work out.
So 1 hour in and I have my pattern pretty much drafted. My front panel is basically the skirt sloper, and the bottom portion of the top sloper, this will be cut out. And then this will be a second piece, just so I can economize the fabric a little better. And it will join from the keyhole here under the bust. And I might cut it here and then take the gather here, or I might just leave it and do the pleat here. That's basically what the front will be. And then for my back panel, I'm not sure if I'm going to go a little wider or a little narrower, so it's safer to cut it wider to begin with. And the back panel again is the basic skirt sloper and the bottom of the back sloper. And this will be cut out this time. And then I'm going to see, I might be able to use the dart from here by moving it here to put in a zipper. But the problem with putting in a single zipper means you're going to have one weird point at your butt, rather than like less noticeable points, because 1, the amount is spread out over 2 different locations, and 2, it is usually the widest part of your butt. So I don't want to have a tail, but also with this jacket you'll never see it. So I might give it a try and see how bad it is. but I should be able to cut this whole shape without cutting any of the darts anyway, so I can test it from there. In the past, I'd worked with a similar fabric for my Raven Queen costume, and I assumed that this one would be the same, but there are a few differences. For instance, this one doesn't stretch at all in this direction, but because the sequins are spaced a little further apart, there is a little bit of stretch going this way. Also, these are much more sequin-like in texture, and the corners are a little sharp, so it was actually kind of painful to wear it around the armhole. This one, however, the sequins are a little more rubbery in feeling, which makes them seem softer. It also made me think they would adhere a little better, but there were already missing spots around some of the edges, as well in as well as in the center, so that's going to be a bit of a problem, and I'm going to have to work around it. But you can just see a square of glue. I should have foreseen this, as there was sequins in the packing tape on the packaging.
Cameras hate it. Evelyn's dress is diamond patterned, so I'll be cutting my pieces on the diagonal. The diamonds are too stiff to fold, and their adhesive makes the fabric stick to the table, so I have to cut each piece one side at a time and rearrange my fabric on the table. To maximize my fabric, I'm placing the smaller bodice pieces on offcuts, trying to maintain the same grain as my skirt panels. The back skirt and other bodice panels are cut the same way. There's actually more than half left, so I can avoid the patch of missing sequins.
Going on 2.5 hours total, all my pieces are cut.
At first I was using clips to avoid puncturing the sequins with needles, but then I realized the seam wouldn't lie flat unless I overlapped my fabric. There didn't need to be a seam here, except that my fabric wasn't long enough diagonally, and this was the best place to hide one. With my neckline assembled, I can cut in the additional keyhole more accurately. Now I cut a bunch of bias tape out of PVC. It's 4-way stretch, so it doesn't need to actually be on the bias. I find it easier to stitch one side down, then fold over and stitch again when working with fabric like PVC, which can be slippery and sticky. Then I can fold over and clip in place before returning to the sewing machine. Moving to my back pieces, I cut deeper, extending the opening from the straps down to the waist. Make some more bias tape, and apply it to the back opening the same way as before. I'm out of invisible zippers, so selected one that matches Evelyn's hair. I have room to interpret here, so decided to line my zipper in bias tape rather than attempt to fold the sequins. It can then be top stitched on like an applique. As well, I can now complete the bias tape. With front and back assembled, I can clip them together at the sides and sew the skirt portion. I haven't decided if and where I'll be adding a breast dart yet. Time to try it on and decide. I didn't end up adding the dart in the back, so it's gaping. The front won't sit well without the darts either, so I go back to my pattern and find the placement. Normally with a dart I would fold and pin, but for the sequins to lay smoothly I once again need to cut and overlay. Then sew it in place and I can finish the side seams. Next I measure my underbust to decide how long a band I need. I also need to take it in under the armpits. And I still need to take it in at the back. I'll probably do 2 darts at the back where the opening corners are. Back to cutting bias tape. This one needs to be thicker as I'll be sewing it into a tube. This material would be hard to turn, so I fold both sides over instead and top stitch one side. The unstitched side will be the top, as I place it along my dress, following the underbust seam. I stitch it to the dress as well as continuing the line where the tube has no dress behind it. For the back gap, I leave a little bit extra to fold over. Depending on fit, I can stitch it in place or add snaps. It's fitting a lot better now, but still needs taken in under the armpits again. After taking them in a second time, I also cover these with bias tape so the sequins won't poke me.
gotta cut this and get it to lay flat, as well as having the bottom, but this seems to be fitting, and once this gets a snap, that'll be fitting well as well. I'm probably going to have to use an adhesive bra when I actually wear this, because there's no way to hide this and still have it quite open.
To finally take in my back panel, I cut straight down from my 90-degree angle, then tucked the center in about 1 inch on both sides.
Since I started my version of the costume, this dress was based off the initial reviewer photos of Evelyn's design, so they were all PC. I'm not sure where the higher res version is coming from, if it's PS5, if it's a higher end PC version. Instead of the bodice being straight down with black outlines, it has nose trim and pleats along the underbust. To make the pleated version, you would continue this line and you would take your dart out and put it over here. So you'd be cropping it like here along and then taking more out from here. So basically you'd have like this, and you just like pin tuck out 3 times the amount that this is. You won't be able to do that with a sequined fabric. You'll have to do that with like a printed spandex, because the sequins don't really crease easily. And you'll also have a really hard time hemming a sequin fabric like this as well. For the jacket, I'm mostly using one I already have. It was $10 at Black Market in Toronto a couple years back. And I wanted to wear it as a real life coat, but the vinyl kind of is shredding and was flaking onto me and getting stuck to me, which looked kind of gross for every day, but should be passable for cosplay. And then I'll need a fur collar. For that, I am using this house coat. Has a detachable collar. Okay, so it's kind of a crescent shape. And if I cut this out of white faux fur, it should sit more or less in place and cover the existing collar. So I think this will work. It is just so rough here.
I'm using a detachable faux fur collar to make a pattern for, well, another detachable faux fur collar. When tracing onto the fur, I try to maximize my use of space, but I ended up cutting it against the grain from what I intended. When cutting fur, try to keep your blade as close to the fabric as possible to avoid trimming the fur. It keeps things a lot cleaner. I've got a solution of fabric medium and acrylic left over from a previous project. It's too pale though, so I'm adding my only bright pink paint for airbrushes to the mix. Then paint it onto my fur, brushing back the parts that will remain white. Unfortunately, I didn't think to add more fabric medium, so this ended up quite crunchy. I try to comb it out to combat this. When they've dried, I clip both sides together, brushing the fur away from the seams. This is very plush, so it's easier to hand stitch. So I bought these tights for Edelgard, but the crotch sits really low on me, so they ended up in my sewing bin. Now I'm going to make these into boot covers. To start, I remove the waistband, then trim the seam that joins the 2 sides. On the up side for boot covers, the legs already fit most of the way up. I fold them over where I'll be hemming them at the top. To get a feel for the shoe pattern, I fold and cut some paper around my shoed foot. Okay, so I trim off the excess, fold, and hem. Back to my shoes. I try my pattern and add more where necessary. When I'm satisfied with it, I trace them onto the scraps I trimmed off of my leggings. There's not much extra space, but I tried to leave some seam allowance to hem the edges. The top edge stays open for now, but I also sew the seam where the side of the shoe meets the sole. When I test them on my shoes, the back seam is too loose initially. Once that's fixed, I try them on with the shoes to make sure they'll slide on easily and fit well. Then I can join the opening of the feet to my legging tubes, and they're complete.
Okay, so here's my wig right out of the bag. I wanted one that was super straight because it is such a blunt cut. I need to cut in some art school bangs. I'm going to mark it where they are, and then I'm going to take off the wig for easier cutting. Like my chin comes to there. Okay, fairly close. And the back we probably don't want to cut too much longer.
For my finger rings, I modeled one finger shape and a shorter thumb in Blender, then printed them in resin. I had tried to scale them 2 millimeters wider than my fingers are across the second knuckle. This was a pretty good close guess for most of them, but my initial design tapered too much towards the tip, and my index finger proved shorter than my middle and ring fingers. Not to mention, my own nails were way too long to hide behind these.
I have my own nails.
So taking these factors into account, I made modifications and printed a second design. Then cured, then painted, and finally tried on. Much better.
Okay, so here's final fit for the dress. It is still a little loose, but because this fabric has no stretch, I felt it was safer to leave a couple inches at the side for flexibility. I also opted not to hem the bottom because folding the sequins wasn't going well, and it doesn't appear to fray at all. That said, the fabric is pretty delicate, and in some of these portions you can see the wear and tear, where the stitching has gone through or where any amount of stress was put on an unhemmed edge. So if you make this yourself, you might want to line it with something if you plan on wearing it more than a couple of times. I would maybe raise the underbust line a little, because when I'm just standing at kind of a relaxed pose, it's a little lower than I'd like. But I think it's pretty elegant and it fits pretty nicely, so time to put the rest on. Wig's still a little too long. Probably should take a second stab at that. For Evelyn's necklace, I also made a 3D model for the pendant. It's got a little loop on each side to join it to a thin chain, and I just painted it the same way as the fingertips. And it's pretty easy to get on with the giant loop. Spooky fingers. So with these claws on, it becomes really difficult to do almost anything else, and they do kind of hit the same points on my hands. Also, I trimmed the nails on this hand, and they work fairly convincingly, but I didn't trim this hand. The STL file for the fingertips as well as the necklace pendant will be available in my Ko-fi shop. You might notice my hair color change partway through this video, and that's because after I made the dress, I lost a lot of my motivation. Keeping yourself motivated is a huge factor in cosplay because there is so much to make even on a simple build. The actual dress took 1 day of time, no problem. But making the fingertips and painting the fur and assembling the necklace and trimming the wig, it all adds up. So overall, a cosplay like this would not actually take me a day. This probably would have taken me a week if I hadn't stopped and obsessively played Hades for like 2 solid weeks of free time. So if you're not getting your stuff done in one day, like, no one does. What I mostly meant by one day build is that these are smaller things, these are like weekend projects instead of like a massive 4-month build, because those are a lot harder to document and you're going to have to wait months and months for video content. Go at your own speed. There's no reason to get anything done at this point anyway, except for your own joy and satisfaction. So do what's best for you. For my next build, I'll probably be building something that is only a single garment, because these full builds are getting a little out of control. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching. A like or a sub would mean so much to me. Let me know in the comments how you're getting through the winter, how you're managing to stay motivated. Especially when there's like no daylight, I find it really hard to keep at things, and usually I can only work on something that I'm really passionate about. So the next thing I might make might be off camera, just for me, just something that I love. And sometimes it's nice to just work on something in my pajamas and not worry about y'all watching me. Enjoy yourselves and make cool shit. Thanks for watching. Bye. This coat is real sweaty.